Economy check-in is over there, miss. The words cut through the morning chaos of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport like a blade through silk. Derek Morrison, gate agent supervisor for Meridian Airlines, didn't even look up from his computer screen as he dismissed the woman standing directly in front of his premium services counter. His manicured finger pointed toward the serpentine lines of frustrated travelers snaking back toward the main terminal entrance. Amara Washington stood perfectly still. She wore an oversized denim jacket that had seen better days, faded black leggings and white sneakers that bore the scuff marks of 1,000 journeys. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her only accessories were a worn leather backpack and the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her small frame. At 32, she had learned that appearance could be the greatest disguise of all. "I'm checking in for Flight 847 to Seattle," Amara said calmly, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had been awake since 3 a.m. She slid her boarding pass and ID across the polished granite counter. First class. Seat 1A. Derek finally looked up. His eyes performed a calculated scan from her sneakers to her ponytail, lingering on the denim jacket with visible disdain. The expression that settled on his face was one of barely contained annoyance, mixed with the kind of superiority that comes from years of judging people by their appearance. Ma'am, Derek said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This counter is reserved for our premium passengers, first class, business class, and platinum elite members only." He gestured again toward the economy lines. "Self-service kiosks are available in the main concourse if you need to make changes to your reservation." The irony wasn't lost on Amara. 24 hours ago, she had signed the final papers completing the $3.8 billion acquisition of Meridian Airlines. The ink on the contracts was barely dry, but the transfer of ownership was complete. She now owned every plane in their fleet, every route they flew, and technically she owned Derek Morrison's job. But he saw a black woman in casual clothes and made his judgment accordingly. "Please scan my ID." Amara repeated, her voice remaining steady despite the growing line of passengers behind her who were beginning to whisper and point. Derek huffed dramatically. "Look, I don't know how you got a first-class boarding pass, but there are procedures. We can't have people gaming the upgrade system." He picked up her ID with 2 fingers, as if touching it might contaminate him, and slammed it onto the scanner with unnecessary force. The computer screen beeped. Derek's fingers froze over the keyboard. His mouth opened slightly as his eyes widened, staring at information that didn't compute with his preconceptions. Passenger Washington. Amara status chairman's circle. Invitation only. Seat 1, A. Premium. Select priority. Executive override. The screen flashed a distinctive platinum border that Derek had only seen in training manuals. Chairman's Circle wasn't just above Platinum Elite. It was above Diamond. It was above Global Services. It was a status level that officially didn't exist for the general public, reserved for a handful of people whose names appeared on very short, very exclusive lists. Derek blinked hard and refreshed the screen. The information remained unchanged. He looked at Amara's denim jacket, then back at the screen, then at her worn sneakers. His brain refused to process the contradiction. "This has to be a system error," Derek muttered, his voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "There's no way." He trailed off, realizing he was about to say something that could land him in front of human resources. "No way," what Amara asked quietly, though they both knew exactly what he meant. Behind Derek, a younger gate agent named Sarah peeked over his shoulder at the screen. She gasped audibly when she saw the platinum designation, then quickly stepped back, suddenly very interested in organizing boarding passes that didn't need organizing. "I'm going to need to verify this with corporate," Derek announced, reaching for his phone, with hands that weren't entirely steady. "Sometimes these high-level accounts get compromised. By all means, verify." Amara said, stepping aside but remaining in the premium lane. She pulled out her phone and noticed several missed calls from David Kim, her executive assistant. She'd deliberately ignored them, wanting to experience Meridian's customer service as an ordinary passenger might. Now she was getting an education in exactly how ordinary passengers were treated when they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of premium. As Derek made his frantic phone calls, the automatic doors at the far end of the terminal parted to admit someone who would receive very different treatment. Marcus Caldwell strode through the entrance like he owned the place, which, in his mind, he practically did. At 41, he had the kind of wealth that came from old family money mixed with ruthless business practices. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, Italian leather shoes that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the confident smirk of someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way. Marcus was followed by a harried-looking assistant struggling with 3 pieces of matching Louis Vuitton luggage. He didn't walk to the premium counter. He glided, expecting the world to rearrange itself around his presence. Derek's entire demeanor transformed the moment he spotted Marcus approaching. The suspicious frown disappeared, replaced by the kind of obsequious smile usually reserved for royalty or very large tips. "Mr. Caldwell?" Derek practically shouted, abandoning his phone call mid-sentence. "Welcome back, sir. We have everything ready for your departure." He gestured grandly toward the premium counter as if unveiling a work of art. Marcus didn't acknowledge Derek's greeting beyond a casual wave of his hand. He was too busy typing on his phone, probably making another $1 million deal while standing in line. This was exactly the kind of behavior Derek expected and respected from a real first-class passenger. "The usual today, Mr. Caldwell?" Derek asked, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Champagne on boarding extra pillows, and we'll make sure 1A is available if you'd prefer to upgrade from your usual 2B. That got Marcus's attention. He looked up from his phone, his eyes immediately scanning the premium area until they landed on Amara, still standing patiently to the side while Derek's verification call apparently continued. "Who's that?" Marcus asked, nodding toward Amara with the kind of casual dismissal usually reserved for furniture or luggage. Derek glanced nervously between Marcus and Amara, clearly hoping this problem would somehow solve itself. "Technical difficulty, sir. We're resolving it now. Don't worry about it." But Marcus was already studying Amara with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating worth at a glance. He saw the denim jacket, the messy ponytail, the complete absence of designer accessories. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to active annoyance. "Is she trying to get into first class?" Marcus asked loudly enough for half the terminal to hear. "Because that's not happening. I don't pay premium prices to sit next to—" He paused, choosing his words carefully but not carefully enough. "People who clearly don't belong there." Derek's face flushed red. He was caught between his obvious bias and the undeniable evidence on his computer screen. "Sir, there seems to be some kind of irregularity with her ticket. We're sorting it out." Amara felt her phone buzz with an urgent text from David board meeting moved up. "Need you in Seattle by 2 p.m. Everything okay?" She typed back. "Everything's fine. Learning a lot about our customer service. See you tonight." What Derek and Marcus didn't realize was that Amara Washington wasn't just any passenger trying to fly first class. She was the new owner of Meridian Airlines, conducting what she thought of as a stress test of her newest acquisition. She had started this practice years ago when building her hospitality empire, believing that you couldn't fix what you couldn't see. Today's experience was already providing more data than she had expected, and she was just getting started. Derek returned from his phone call looking pale and confused, as if he'd just been told that gravity had stopped working. He approached Amara with the cautious steps of someone walking through a minefield. "Ms. Washington," he said, stumbling slightly over her name as he read it from the screen. "Corporate confirms that your status appears to be legitimate." The words came out like he was describing something physically painful. Appears to be... Amara raised an eyebrow. Well, it's just that Chairman's Circle is usually reserved for... Derek gestured vaguely, searching for words that wouldn't get him fired. Very specific individuals. Board members, major shareholders, that sort of thing. I see Amara said quietly. And what sort of individual do you think I am? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to spread. Derek realized he was standing at the edge of a very deep hole, but his shovel was already in his hands, and Marcus Caldwell was watching with growing impatience. Look, Derek said, lowering his voice to what he probably thought was a reasonable tone. I'm not trying to cause problems, but we get people trying to scam the upgrade system all the time. They use stolen credit cards, fake confirmations, employee buddy passes they're not supposed to have. You have to understand from my perspective. Your perspective, Amara repeated slowly, is that I couldn't possibly have earned Chairman's Circle status legitimately. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Marcus Caldwell had heard enough. He stepped forward, inserting himself into the conversation with the entitlement of someone who had never learned to wait his turn. Excuse me, Marcus announced, directing his attention to Derek while completely ignoring Amara. I don't mean to interrupt your investigation, but I have a very important meeting in Seattle. Can we expedite this? Whatever the issue is with her documentation, surely it can be resolved after I'm on the plane. Derek nodded eagerly, grateful for Marcus's intervention. Absolutely, Mr. Caldwell. Let me get you checked in right away. He turned back to Amara. Ms. Washington, I'm going to need you to step aside while we finish verifying your account. This might take a while. How long is a while? Amara asked. Hard to say. These high-level security reviews can be thorough. Behind the counter, Sarah was pulling up Marcus's reservation on her screen. She frowned, double-checking the information, then looked up at Derek with confusion. Mr. Morrison, Sarah called quietly. Could I speak with you for a moment? Derek ignored her, too focused on managing what he saw as a delicate situation between a valued customer and a potential security risk. Mr. Morrison. Sarah tried again more insistently this time. There's something you need to see about Mr. Caldwell's reservation. What is it? Derek snapped, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. Sarah beckoned him over to her screen, whispering urgently. Mr. Caldwell's original flight was canceled yesterday. He was rebooked on this flight as a standby passenger. He's not assigned to 1A. He's not assigned to any first-class seat. Derek's face went white. He glanced back at Marcus, who was checking his Rolex with obvious impatience, then at Amara, who was watching the exchange with quiet interest. That can't be right, Derek whispered back. Mr. Caldwell always flies first class. He's been upgraded every time. Not today, Sarah said, pointing at the screen. Every first-class seat is sold. He's on the wait list for Economy Plus. Derek felt sweat beading on his forehead. In the span of 5 minutes, his day had gone from routine to catastrophic. He had a Chairman's Circle passenger he'd essentially accused of fraud, and his favorite VIP was actually flying standby in coach. Don't say anything, Derek hissed to Sarah. Let me handle this. He returned to the counter with a forced smile that fooled no one. Good news, everyone. We've got everything sorted out. He turned to Amara first. Ms. Washington Corporate has cleared your reservation. You're confirmed in 1A. Then he turned to Marcus with considerably less enthusiasm. Mr. Caldwell, there's been a slight change to your seating assignment. What kind of change? Marcus demanded. Due to the cancellation yesterday, you were rebooked as standby. The good news is we can confirm you on the flight, but first class is completely sold out. I can get you a premium economy seat, though. Extra legroom priority service. Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of red. Absolutely not, I don't fly coach, ever. Move her. He pointed at Amara like she was a piece of furniture blocking his path. Sir, I can't do that. Her reservation. I don't care about her reservation, Marcus snarled. Do you know who I am? Do you know how much money I spend with this airline? I've been flying Meridian for 15 years. She probably bought that ticket with a credit card she found in a parking lot. The entire premium check-in area had gone silent. Other passengers were staring, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly becoming an ugly scene. Amara noticed an elderly couple exchanging shocked glances and a young businessman looking genuinely uncomfortable with Marcus's outburst. Mr. Caldwell Derrick said carefully, I understand your frustration, but fix this, Marcus interrupted. I don't care how you do it, just fix it. And I better not hear any more about policies or procedures. Your job is to take care of your important customers, not to bend over backward for people who clearly don't belong in first class. Amara had heard enough. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through Marcus's tantrum with calm precision. Mr. Caldwell, she said quietly, you seem to be under the impression that your importance gives you the right to take what doesn't belong to you. She looked him directly in the eyes. I'm curious about your definition of belonging. Please enlighten me. Marcus stared at her as if she'd just spoken in a foreign language. In his world, people who looked like Amara didn't challenge people who looked like him. They certainly didn't do it in public with witnesses recording everything. I beg your pardon, Marcus, said his voice dripping with condescension. You said I don't belong in first class. I'd like to know how you reached that conclusion. Is it my clothes, my appearance, or something else? Derek could see the conversation spinning completely out of control. Perhaps we should all take a step back. No, Amara said firmly. I think we should continue. Mr. Caldwell clearly has strong opinions about who deserves premium service. I'd like to hear them. Marcus looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers, many of whom now had their phones out. He realized he was being recorded, but his anger and entitlement overrode his common sense. Look, Princess Marcus said, his voice thick with contempt. I don't know what game you're playing, but some of us actually earned our way into first class. Some of us actually contribute to society instead of looking for handouts and freebies. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even Derek, who had been sympathetic to Marcus's position, looked uncomfortable with the naked racism that had just been displayed. Amara smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. Thank you for clarifying your position, Mr. Caldwell. That was very illuminating. She turned to Derek. I assume my boarding pass is ready. Derek printed her boarding pass with hands that shook slightly. As he handed it to her, he avoided making eye contact. Gate B-17, he mumbled. Boarding begins in 30 minutes. Amara took the pass and looked at both men one final time. Gentlemen, I have a feeling this is going to be a very memorable flight. As she walked away toward security, she pulled out her phone and sent a text to David Kim, Initiate Protocol 9, the moment we land in Seattle. Make sure legal and HR are standing by. And David. This one's going to be interesting. The first-class cabin of Meridian Flight 847 was a study in understated luxury. 12 seats arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each one a private pod with lie-flat capability, personal entertainment systems, and enough space for even the tallest passenger to stretch out comfortably. The lighting was warm and inviting, designed to make passengers feel like they were entering an exclusive club rather than an aircraft cabin. Amara was the first passenger to board a privilege that came with her chairman's circle status. She made her way to seat one of the most coveted spot in the cabin, located at the front window with maximum privacy and space. As she settled in, stowing her backpack in the overhead compartment, she couldn't help but appreciate the irony of the situation. She now owned this plane, these seats, and the entire airline, yet 20 minutes ago she'd been treated like a criminal trying to scam her way into a free upgrade. She pulled out a stack of documents marked Meridian Airlines, post-acquisition integration, and spread them across her tray table. To any observer, it would look like homework or business school case studies. In reality, she was reviewing the organizational charts and performance metrics of the company she'd just purchased, including employee satisfaction surveys that painted a troubling picture of customer service culture. The boarding door opened again, and Victoria Blackwood glided into the cabin like she was walking a runway in Paris. At 38, Victoria was the kind of woman who could stop traffic without trying. She had platinum blonde hair, styled in a perfect chignon, ice blue eyes that missed nothing, and the kind of bone structure that belonged on magazine covers. Her flight attendant uniform, while regulation had been tailored to fit her curves like it was designed by Versace. Even the airline's conservative navy blue and silver color scheme seemed to have been created specifically to complement her complexion. Victoria had been working first class for 12 years, and she ran the cabin like her personal kingdom. She knew exactly which passengers tipped well, which ones complained to corporate, and which ones had the power to make or break a flight attendant's career. She prided herself on reading people instantly, and the woman in seat 1A was setting off every alarm in her perfectly groomed head. "Good morning," Victoria said, stopping beside Amara's seat with a smile that was beautiful, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. "I'm Victoria, your lead flight attendant today. I see you're in 1A. Good morning," Amara replied without looking up from her documents. "Yes, that's my assigned seat." Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I just wanted to mention that we hold 1A for our most established frequent flyers. Platinum Elite and above, you understand. Sometimes the reservation system makes errors during irregular operations." Her tone was conversational, but the implication was clear: you don't belong here. Amara finally looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "I understand. And I am above Platinum Elite." "Oh, wonderful. What level are you, Chairman's Circle?" Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. She had been flying for over a decade and had never personally served a Chairman's Circle member. In fact, she wasn't entirely sure the status level actually existed outside of airline employee rumors and internet forums. "That's impressive," Victoria said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "May I see your boarding pass? Just to confirm the seat assignment." Without waiting for permission, Victoria plucked the pass from Amara's tray table and examined it with the intensity of a forensic investigator. She held it up to the light, checked the barcode, even ran her finger along the edge as if testing for forgeries. "This does appear to be legitimate," Victoria conceded grudgingly, handing the pass back. "Though I have to say, Chairman's Circle passengers usually travel with more extensive arrangements. Personal assistants, upgraded catering requests, that sort of thing." "I prefer to travel simply," Amara said, returning her attention to her documents. Victoria didn't move. She stood beside the seat, radiating disapproval like expensive perfume. "Well, I suppose we'll make the best of it. I do hope you'll find our service adequate, given what you're probably accustomed to." The subtle insult hung in the air between them. Victoria was suggesting that Amara's expectations were probably lower than those of real first-class passengers, which meant the service could be correspondingly reduced. Before Amara could respond, the boarding door opened again and Marcus Caldwell entered the cabin. He had clearly sweet-talked his way past Derek's objections, probably with promises of complaints to corporate or threats about his 15-year relationship with the airline. He strode directly to seat 1A as if it was his by divine right. "Excuse me, Marcus," announced loudly, not bothering to look at Amara. "You're in my seat." Victoria's entire demeanor transformed instantly. The cold professionalism melted away, replaced by warm, genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Caldwell. What a wonderful surprise. I had no idea you were on this flight. Last-minute change of plans?" Marcus said, still standing over Amara like an eviction notice. "Had to make an emergency trip to Seattle. You know how it is." He gestured vaguely at Amara. There seems to be some confusion about seating." "Oh my," Victoria said, her voice dripping with concern. "Let me sort this out right away." She turned to Amara with a smile that had shifted back to Arctic temperatures. "Ma'am, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This seat is reserved for one of our very special passengers." "I can see that," Amara said quietly. "Unfortunately, it's also my assigned seat." "Well, yes, but Mr. Caldwell has been flying with us for 15 years. He always sits in 1A when he's in first class. It's practically his seat." "Practically isn't the same as actually," Amara pointed out. Marcus leaned down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Amara's. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't know how you managed to get that boarding pass, but this seat is mine. I'll give you 500 cash right now to move to economy. That's probably more than you paid for your entire ticket." The condescension was so thick it was almost visible. Around the cabin, other passengers were beginning to take notice. A businessman in seat 3A had lowered his newspaper and was watching with obvious discomfort. An elderly woman in 2F looked scandalized by Marcus's behavior. "I'm not interested in your money," Amara said calmly. "Everyone's interested in money, Princess. The question is, how much?" Marcus pulled out his wallet and started counting bills. 1,000, cash, right now. Victoria clapped her hands together as if Marcus had just offered to cure cancer. "Mr. Caldwell, you're too generous, ma'am. That's an incredibly kind offer. Most people would jump at the chance." "Most people aren't me," Amara replied. The cabin door opened again and Elena Rodriguez entered, looking nervous about her first day working first-class service. At 28, Elena had been with Meridian for 3 years, working her way up from economy to premium economy, and now finally to first class. She was supposed to be learning from Victoria, but what she was witnessing felt more like a masterclass in discrimination than customer service. Elena Victoria called out with false cheerfulness. "Come meet Mr. Caldwell. He's one of our most valued passengers." She gestured toward Amara dismissively. "And we're just sorting out a small seating issue." Elena approached cautiously. She had overheard enough of the conversation to understand that something was very wrong, but Victoria was her supervisor, and this was her first day in the premium cabin. Perhaps Elena suggested quietly we could check with the gate agent about alternative arrangements. Victoria's smile became predatory. "That's exactly what I was thinking. I'll call Derek right now." She reached for the interphone. "Mr. Morrison?" "It's Victoria in first class. We have a situation up here that needs your immediate attention." Amara felt her phone vibrate with another message from David Kim boarding. "Soon, Seattle team is standing by. Weather looks perfect for a dramatic landing." She typed back quickly. "Boarding complete soon. Save the drama for when we arrive. This is just getting interesting." As Victoria continued her phone conversation with Derek, speaking in hushed, urgent tones about irregularities and passenger compliance issues, Amara realized that her stress test of Meridian Airlines was exceeding all expectations. She was learning exactly how her new company treated customers who didn't fit their narrow definition of worthy. And she was taking detailed notes. 5 minutes later, the cockpit door opened with the pneumatic hiss of expensive engineering, and Captain James Sullivan emerged like a naval officer arriving to quell a mutiny. At 52, Sullivan had the kind of weathered authority that came from 30 years of flying commercial aircraft and believing absolutely that his word was law at 35,000 feet. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his uniform pressed to military standards, and his expression carried the weight of someone who had never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with sufficiently forceful leadership. "What seems to be the issue here?" Sullivan asked, his voice booming across the first-class cabin with the kind of volume that brooked no disagreement. Victoria immediately straightened her posture, shifting to something approaching military attention. "Captain Sullivan, we have a passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding seating arrangements." Sullivan's eyes swept the cabin, taking in Marcus Caldwell standing possessively beside seat 1. Victoria's carefully composed expression of professional concern, and Elena hovering uncertainly in the background. Finally, his gaze settled on Amara, still seated calmly with her documents spread across the tray table. "Ma'am Sullivan said, addressing Amara with the tone one might use to discuss nuclear disarmament, I understand there's some confusion about your seat assignment." "No confusion on my part," Captain Amara replied evenly. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat." Sullivan frowned. He had dealt with thousands of passengers over the years, and he prided himself on reading people quickly and accurately. The woman in 1A didn't fit any of his usual categories. She wasn't dressed like his typical first-class passengers, but she wasn't acting like someone trying to scam an upgrade either. She was too calm, too confident, too unbothered. Ms. Sullivan paused, realizing he didn't know her name. Washington. Amara Washington. "Ms. Washington, I'm sure you understand that flight attendant decisions regarding cabin management are final. If my crew believes there's been a seating error, we need to resolve it before departure." "Of course," Amara said. "What's the error exactly?" Sullivan looked to Victoria, who stepped forward with the kind of practiced explanation she had clearly been rehearsing. "Captain Mr. Caldwell is a 15-year Platinum Elite member who always occupies 1A when traveling first class. Miss Washington's reservation appears to be some kind of system glitch or irregular booking that created a conflict. For operational efficiency and passenger comfort, I recommended she relocate to seat 4D, which is currently unoccupied." Sullivan nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. He turned back to Amara. "That seems like a reasonable solution." "Mr. Caldwell is an established passenger with clear seating preferences, and 4D is still a premium seat. It's also in the last row of first class directly next to the galley and lavatory," Amara pointed out. "Hardly equivalent to 1A. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be accommodating here," Sullivan said, his patience beginning to thin. "You have two choices. You can move to 4D voluntarily, or I can have airport security escort you off the aircraft. This is my plane, and my crew's decisions are final." Elena, who had been listening to the entire exchange with growing discomfort, found herself in an impossible position. She was new to first class, completely dependent on Victoria's mentorship, and terrified of contradicting her captain on her very first day. But something about the situation felt deeply wrong. Captain Elena said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps I could double-check the passenger manifest to confirm." "That won't be necessary." Victoria cut her off sharply. "I've already verified everything with ground crew." Marcus, who had been remarkably patient during the official intervention, decided to add his voice to the chorus. "Captain, I appreciate you taking control of this situation. Some people just don't understand that first class isn't for everyone. It's about more than just buying a ticket. It's about understanding the culture, the expectations, the atmosphere." Sullivan nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of perspective he expected from his premium passengers. "Ms. Washington, Mr. Caldwell makes a valid point. First-class service is designed for passengers who understand and appreciate the premium experience, and you've determined that I don't understand or appreciate premium service based on what exactly Amara asked." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sullivan realized he was being asked to articulate something that should have remained unspoken. His judgment was based on appearance, on assumptions, on the same superficial criteria that Derek and Victoria had used. But saying that out loud would create the kind of legal exposure that Airline spent millions trying to avoid. It's about operational efficiency," Sullivan said finally. "Mr. Caldwell is a known quantity. We understand his service requirements. You're an unknown variable, and that creates complications." "I see. So unknown variables should be relegated to inferior seats." "That's not what I said, but it's what you meant." Sullivan felt his authority being undermined in front of his crew and passengers. In his world, captains didn't engage in philosophical debates with passengers. They gave orders and passengers followed them. Period. Ms. Washington, this is your final warning. Move to 4D immediately or I will remove you from this aircraft. You will be placed on our no-fly list and you will miss your connection to Seattle. Is that really what you want? Amara looked around the cabin one final time. She saw Marcus smirking with satisfaction. She saw Victoria's cold triumph barely concealed behind professional courtesy. She saw Elena's obvious discomfort and moral conflict. She saw other passengers either staring at their phones to avoid involvement or watching the drama unfold like it was entertainment. Very well, Captain Amara said finally. I'll move to 4D. She gathered her documents and backpack, standing slowly and deliberately. As she passed Captain Sullivan, she paused. I want it noted for the record that I'm being coerced to move under threat of removal, despite having a valid ticket for Seat 1A. Noted, Sullivan said dismissively, already turning away. And Captain Amara added quietly, You might want to review your employee handbook section on passenger discrimination. I have a feeling it's going to become very relevant very soon. Sullivan waved her off, already focusing on more important matters. Marcus slid into 1A like he was reclaiming a throne, and Victoria immediately began fawning over him with offers of champagne and warm nuts. Amara settled into 4D, pulled out her phone, and sent a message to David Kim Protocol 9 confirmed. Document everything from this point forward. Full legal review upon landing. This is going to be comprehensive. As the plane pushed back from the gate, she opened her laptop and began typing detailed notes about everything she had witnessed. She was no longer just stress-testing customer service. She was building a case. As Flight 847 reached cruising altitude over the Georgia countryside, the cabin service began in earnest, and with it Amara's education in how Meridian Airlines treated passengers they deemed unworthy of respect. Victoria moved through the first-class cabin with the practiced grace of a ballet dancer, but her performance was clearly choreographed to highlight the stark differences in how passengers were valued. She began her service at the front of the cabin, naturally starting with Marcus in Seat 1A. Mr. Caldwell, Victoria cooed her voice, taking on the warm, intimate tone usually reserved for close friends or generous lovers. I've taken the liberty of chilling your favorite Dom Perignon. Would you like me to pour you a glass now, or would you prefer to wait until after takeoff? Marcus waved his hand magnanimously, not bothering to look up from his phone, where he was apparently day trading his way through the first hour of flight. Now is fine, darling. And see if you can find some of those macadamia nuts. The warm ones, not the cold ones. Of course, sir. I'll warm them personally. Victoria practically glowed with the opportunity to provide such specialized service. Amara watched this exchange from her exile in 4D, noting how Victoria's entire body language changed when dealing with Marcus. Her posture was attentive, almost subservient. Her smile was genuine rather than professional. She touched his armrest when she spoke, creating a level of intimacy that suggested he was not just a passenger, but a valued friend. When Victoria finally made her way to the back of the cabin, her transformation was stark and immediate. The warm smile disappeared, replaced by the kind of neutral expression one might wear when dealing with a minor inconvenience. Her posture straightened into something more formal, more distant. Beverage service. Victoria asked Amara the question delivered with the enthusiasm of someone reading tax code. I'll have champagne, please. The Dom Perignon that you offered Mr. Caldwell. Victoria's laugh was short and sharp. I'm afraid that's reserved for our Platinum Elite and above passengers. We have a nice domestic sparkling wine that's included with your service. I am above Platinum Elite, Amara reminded her. Yes, well, Victoria set her tone, suggesting she didn't believe this for a moment. The Dom Perignon is in limited supply, and we like to ensure our established frequent flyers are taken care of first. I can offer you the sparkling wine or perhaps a soft drink." Elena, who was working the middle section of the cabin, overheard this exchange and looked confused. She had seen the catering manifest during pre-flight preparation. There were 12 bottles of Dom Perignon loaded for this flight, more than enough for every first-class passenger to have multiple glasses. Victoria Elena called out quietly, "Didn't we load extra champagne today?" "I thought, Elena." Victoria interrupted sharply. "Could you please focus on your own section? I'm perfectly capable of managing beverage inventory." Elena flushed and returned to her tasks, but not before catching Amara's eye. In that brief moment of contact, Amara saw something that gave her Hope moral discomfort. Elena knew what was happening was wrong, even if she didn't have the authority or courage to stop it. "I'll take a water," Amara said finally. "Still no ice." Victoria returned with a plastic bottle of water, the kind served in economy class rather than the glass bottles and crystal glasses used for other first-class passengers. She placed it on Amara's tray table with slightly more force than necessary, causing some of the water to slosh onto Amara's documents. "Oh," Victoria said, her voice carrying no trace of genuine apology. "How clumsy of me. I hope those weren't important." Amara moved her papers away from the puddle, noting that Victoria made no effort to help clean up the mess or offer napkins. "They're fine. Just business documents." "I'm sure," Victoria replied with a knowing smile. "Let me know if you need anything else. Within reason, of course." The meal service that followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive discrimination. Marcus received his meal on actual china with silver utensils and a linen napkin. The presentation was restaurant-quality roasted duck breast with truffle reduction seasonal vegetables artfully arranged and a warm bread roll with butter shaped like a small rose. When Victoria reached Amara, she was carrying a plastic tray that looked like it had been assembled in an airport food court. The entree was a sad-looking chicken sandwich wrapped in cellophane, accompanied by a small bag of pretzels and an apple that had seen better days. "Here we are," Victoria announced, setting the tray down with a plastic thud. "I'm afraid the kitchen had some supply issues today. This is the best we can do." Amara looked at the sandwich, then at Marcus's gourmet meal visible from her seat. "Supply issues?" "Yes, terribly inconvenient. The catering truck apparently shorted us on first-class meals. We had to prioritize based on passenger status." Victoria's expression was one of exaggerated sympathy. "I'm sure you understand." "Of course," Amara said quietly. "I understand perfectly." As Victoria walked away, Amara pulled out her phone and discreetly took a photo of her meal, then another photo of Marcus enjoying his duck. She was building a visual record of the disparate treatment that would be hard to deny or dismiss. Elena appeared beside her seat a few minutes later, looking nervous but determined. "Ms. Washington, I wanted to apologize. There weren't any supply issues. We have extra first-class meals." "I could." Elena Victoria's voice cut across the cabin like a whip. "What did I tell you about focusing on your own section?" Elena's face crumpled. You were just overstepping your boundaries." "Again." Victoria marched over to them, her heels clicking against the cabin floor with military precision. "Ms. Rodriguez, perhaps you'd like to explain to the captain why you're undermining senior crew members." "I wasn't trying to—" "Go clean the galley," Victoria ordered. "Now." Elena hurried away, but not before mouthing, "I'm sorry," to Amara. Watching this interaction, Amara realized that Victoria's cruelty extended beyond passengers to her own colleagues. She was creating a culture of fear and compliance that enabled her discrimination. "I hope you'll forgive Elena," Victoria said, turning back to Amara with false concern. "She's new to first class and doesn't understand our service protocols yet. We have very specific standards to maintain." "Your standards are certainly clear," Amara agreed. The afternoon wore on, and with it, Victoria's campaign of subtle harassment intensified. When Amara requested a pillow, Victoria informed her that they were being saved for passengers with overnight connections. When she asked about the Wi-Fi password, she was told it was reserved for business class and above, despite sitting in first class. When she tried to use the forward lavatory, Victoria directed her to the one in economy, claiming the first-class facility was temporarily out of order, while other passengers used it freely. Each incident was small, deniable, and individually insignificant. But together they formed a pattern of deliberate humiliation designed to make Amara understand her place in Victoria's hierarchy. The breaking point came when Amara opened her laptop to work on some documents. She had been typing for perhaps 10 minutes when Victoria appeared at her elbow with a spray bottle and cleaning cloth. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," Victoria said with false sweetness, "but I need to clean your tray table. Health regulations, you understand. I'm using it right now," Amara pointed out. "Yes, but we have to maintain cleanliness standards. It'll just take a moment." Without waiting for permission, Victoria began spraying cleaning solution directly onto Amara's laptop keyboard. "Stop," Amara said, quickly closing the computer. But it was too late. Cleaning fluid had seeped between the keys and the screen flickered ominously before going dark. "Oh my." Victoria gasped, her performance of surprise worthy of an Oscar. "I had no idea you had your computer open. How terrible. Electronics and cleaning solutions don't mix, do they?" Amara stared at her now dead laptop. Months of work were potentially lost, but more importantly, the deliberate nature of the sabotage was unmistakable. Victoria had seen the laptop, aimed the spray bottle directly at it, and squeezed the trigger. "I'm sure your travel insurance will cover the replacement," Victoria continued cheerfully. "These things happen when people don't secure their valuables properly." Around the cabin, other passengers had noticed the incident. The businessman in 3A was openly staring, his expression a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The elderly woman in 2F looked like she wanted to say something but didn't dare. Even Marcus had looked up from his phone, though his expression suggested amusement rather than concern. "Is there a problem back there?" Marcus called out loudly. "Some of us are trying to work in peace." "No problem at all, Mr. Caldwell," Victoria replied. "Just a small cleaning accident, nothing that can't be handled." Amara felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She had experienced discrimination before, subtle and not so subtle, but this level of calculated cruelty was breathtaking in its audacity. Victoria wasn't just enforcing some misguided sense of social hierarchy. She was actively enjoying the process of degradation. "Victoria," Amara said quietly, "you've just destroyed my computer. I'm sure that's an exaggeration. Modern electronics are quite durable." "It was an accident, right? Not intentional." "Of course it was an accident. I would never deliberately damage a passenger's property." Victoria's smile was radiant with false innocence. "Good. Then you'll be happy to fill out an incident report documenting the accident, won't you?" Victoria's smile flickered. "That's probably not necessary. Like I said, these things happen. But if it was an accident, you'll want to document it properly. For insurance purposes. For your own protection." Amara's voice remained calm, but there was toward the galley. Amara pulled out her toward the galley. Amara pulled out her phone and sent a detailed message to David Kim, documenting the laptop incident, with precise timestamps and witness information. She was no longer just building a case for discrimination. She was building a case for deliberate destruction of property, and Victoria Blackwood had just made it personal. 3 hours into the flight, as the plane cruised over the Colorado Rockies, Victoria's campaign of harassment reached new heights of creativity and cruelty. Having successfully destroyed Amara's laptop and faced no consequences, she seemed emboldened to push the boundaries even further. The next assault came disguised as concern for passenger safety. Ms. Washington Victoria announced loudly as she approached Seat 4D, carrying a small flashlight and wearing an expression of exaggerated worry. "I need to conduct a safety inspection of your seating area." Amara looked up from the magazine she'd been reading, the only entertainment option left to her after the laptop incident. A safety inspection. Of what? "There have been reports of unusual noises coming from this section of the aircraft," Victoria explained, her voice pitched loud enough to ensure that surrounding passengers could hear every word. "The captain is concerned about possible structural issues or foreign objects that might have been brought aboard." The implication was clear and insulting. Victoria was suggesting that Amara had smuggled something dangerous onto the plane, requiring a security search of her seating area. What kind of foreign objects? Amara asked calmly. "Oh, you know, contraband items, weapons, things that might not have been properly screened." Victoria began shining her flashlight under Amara's seat, making a great show of the inspection. "We've had problems before with passengers bringing items they shouldn't have." Elena, who was restocking the galley, stopped what she was doing and stared in disbelief. She had been working for Meridian for 3 years and had never once seen a mid-flight safety inspection of a passenger's seating area. The procedure didn't exist outside of genuine emergency situations. Elena called out uncertainly, "Is this something the captain actually requested? Because I don't remember Elena for the last time." "Focus on your own responsibilities," Victoria snapped. "This is a senior crew member procedure that you wouldn't be familiar with." Victoria continued her theatrical inspection, opening overhead bins above Amara's seat and examining the contents with suspicious scrutiny. She muttered loudly. "This bag doesn't look like standard carry-on luggage." Amara's backpack was indeed different from the typical first-class passenger's luggage. It was worn leather practical, rather than fashionable, clearly showing signs of extensive travel. But it was also perfectly regulation compliant, and had been through security screening just like every other bag on the plane. "It's my backpack," Amara said simply. "Yes, but it's very used-looking. Sometimes people acquire bags from questionable sources, bags that might have been used for questionable purposes." Victoria's insinuation was that Amara's luggage might be stolen or connected to criminal activity. Marcus, who had been enjoying the show from his throne in seat 1, decided to add his voice to the proceedings. "You know, flight attendant," he called out, using Victoria's title rather than her name to emphasize her service position. "I've been smelling something odd back there, too. Kind of a musty smell, like someone who doesn't bathe regularly." The insult was so blatant and cruel that several passengers gasped audibly. The elderly woman in 2F looked horrified, and even the businessman in 3A seemed shocked by Marcus's naked racism. "Oh my," Victoria said, her eyes lighting up with malicious joy that is concerning. "Poor hygiene can create health hazards in a closed cabin environment." She leaned closer to Amara, making an exaggerated show of sniffing the air around her seat. "You know, Mr. Caldwell might be right. There is an unusual aroma in this area." Amara remained perfectly still, watching Victoria's performance with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a particularly toxic specimen of humanity. She understood now that she was witnessing more than just customer service failures. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign of racial harassment designed to break her spirit and force her to react emotionally. Perhaps Victoria continued, "You'd be more comfortable in the economy cabin. The air circulation is different back there, and you might feel less conspicuous." "I'm perfectly comfortable here," Amara replied evenly. "But you must understand that other passengers have complained." "Mr. Caldwell is an extremely valued customer, and if he's uncomfortable, then perhaps Mr. Caldwell should consider flying private jets if he's so sensitive to sharing cabin space with other paying passengers." The comment hit its mark. Marcus's face reddened, and Victoria looked like she'd been slapped. In their world, people like Amara didn't push back. They certainly didn't suggest that wealthy white passengers were being unreasonable. Ma'am Victoria said, her voice taking on a warning tone. I'm going to have to ask you to moderate your language. We don't tolerate disrespectful behavior toward other passengers. What's disrespectful about suggesting someone fly private if they don't like commercial aviation? It's your tone, your attitude. Victoria was struggling to articulate exactly what was wrong with Amara's response, without admitting that the real issue was her refusal to accept degrading treatment. Elena had been watching this entire exchange with growing horror. As a Hispanic woman who had faced her own share of workplace discrimination, she recognized what was happening. Victoria was using her position of authority to conduct a campaign of racial harassment, and she was doing it with such theatrical flair that she could claim it was all legitimate crew procedures. Victoria Elena said, finding her voice despite her fear, maybe we should check with the captain before continuing this inspection. The captain is busy flying the plane, Elena. He trusts senior crew members to handle cabin management without bothering him with every minor issue. But this doesn't seem minor, and I don't remember any training about mid-flight safety inspections of passenger seating areas. Victoria turned on Elena with the fury of someone whose authority was being challenged by a subordinate. Elena Rodriguez, you are on your first day in first class. I have been working this cabin for 12 years. Are you seriously questioning my professional judgment? Elena wilted under the assault, but she didn't back down completely. I just think we should follow proper procedures. The proper procedure is for junior crew members to follow senior crew instructions without argument. If you can't handle that, perhaps you belong back in economy where the procedures are simpler. The threat was clear. Elena could either enable Victoria's harassment or face professional consequences that could derail her career advancement. It was a choice between complicity and self-preservation. While Victoria was focused on intimidating Elena, Amara was discreetly using her phone to record audio of the entire exchange. She had documented Victoria's safety inspection, Marcus's hygiene comments, and most importantly, Victoria's admission that she was operating without captain's orders or established procedures. I apologize for the disruption, Victoria announced to the cabin, her voice taking on the martyred tone of someone dealing with unreasonable circumstances, but sometimes we have to take extra precautions to ensure everyone's comfort and safety. She returned to Amara's seat one final time. Ms. Washington, I'm going to need you to remain in your seat for the remainder of the flight. No getting up, no using the facilities, no bothering other passengers. The captain's orders. The captain ordered this personally, Amara asked. That's right. When did you speak with the captain about me specifically? Victoria hesitated. She hadn't actually spoken with Captain Sullivan since the seating dispute during boarding. Her entire campaign of harassment had been conducted on her own authority, justified by her assumption that the captain would support any actions taken against a passenger he'd already deemed problematic. I don't need to justify crew communications to passengers, Victoria said finally. Of course not. Amara agreed. I'm sure Captain Sullivan will be very interested to hear about all the orders he's apparently given regarding my behavior. Something in Amara's tone made Victoria suddenly nervous. The woman in 4D was too calm, too confident, too unbroken despite hours of systematic degradation. Most passengers would have been in tears by now, or would have exploded in anger, giving Victoria grounds for more severe disciplinary action. But Amara Washington just sat there taking notes, recording audio, and watching Victoria's performance with the kind of analytical attention usually reserved for laboratory experiments. For the first time since boarding, Victoria began to wonder if she might have miscalculated. While Victoria was basking in her perceived victory over Amara, Elena Rodriguez was experiencing a crisis of conscience that would ultimately change the trajectory of the entire flight. She had retreated to the galley ostensibly to prepare for the next beverage service, but in reality she was struggling with the moral weight of what she had witnessed. Elena had been raised by her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned offices for 40 years while facing her own share of discrimination. Mija, her abuela, used to say when you see someone being treated like garbage because of how they look, you have two choices. You can look the other way and become part of the problem, or you can speak up and become part of the solution. The memory of those words burned in Elena's mind as she mechanically arranged napkins and glasses, her hands shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. She knew what Victoria was doing was wrong. More than wrong, it was evil. But she also knew that challenging Victoria openly would likely end her own career before it had really begun. Elena pulled out her tablet and accessed the passenger manifest, something she had done routinely during pre-flight checks, but now approached with detective-like intensity. She needed to understand who Amara Washington really was, because something about Victoria's treatment of her didn't add up. The first surprise was Amara's status level. Chairman's Circle wasn't just above Platinum Elite. It was a tier that Elena had heard whispered about, but never actually seen. The designation came with privileges that superseded almost every other passenger classification, including guaranteed seat selection, unlimited upgrades, and direct access to corporate executives for complaint resolution. But it was the second piece of information that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. Listed under Special Services Required was a note that made her heart race. VIP Protocol. Board Member Level. Handle with extreme care. Contact CEO Office for any issues. Board Member Level. Elena read the notation 3 times to make sure she wasn't mistaken. Amara Washington wasn't just a high-status passenger. She was somehow connected to Meridian's corporate leadership at the highest levels. Elena quickly switched to Marcus Caldwell's reservation, and what she found there made her stomach drop to her shoes. Marcus's original flight had been canceled due to mechanical issues, and he had been rebooked on Flight 847 as a standby passenger. His confirmed seat assignment was 12B in economy class. There was a note from the gate agent stating that first class was sold out, and no upgrades were available, which meant that when Captain Sullivan had forced Amara to move from 1A to 4D, he had been giving her legitimate paid seat to a standby passenger who had no right to be in first class at all. Elena felt sick. She had just witnessed the systematic harassment of a board-level VIP who had been illegally displaced from her assigned seat to accommodate a passenger who shouldn't even have been in the cabin. She quickly opened the airline's internal communications app and sent a message to Derek Morrison, the gate agent supervisor, "Need immediate clarification on Flight 847 passenger accommodations. Can you confirm seating assignments for Washington and Caldwell?" Derek's response came back within minutes. "What's the problem? Caldwell is a loyal customer, made special accommodation per captain's request." Why? Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. Derek was admitting in writing that he had overridden the reservation system to illegally upgrade Marcus while displacing a legitimate first-class passenger. And he had done it at Captain Sullivan's request, which meant the corruption went all the way to the cockpit. Her hands trembling, Elena began documenting everything she could find. She screenshotted the passenger manifests, the seating assignments, Derek's admission, and the VIP protocols for Amara's reservation. If this situation exploded, and she was beginning to suspect it would, she wanted to be on the right side of history. "Elena, what are you doing back there?" Victoria's voice cut through the galley like a knife. Elena quickly closed the tablet and turned to face her supervisor, her heart pounding. "Just preparing for the next service, Victoria." Victoria approached with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood in the water. "You've been awfully quiet since our conversation about proper procedures. I hope you're not having second thoughts about supporting your senior crew members." "Of course not," Elena lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good. Because I'd hate to have to report to management that our newest first-class crew member was undermining established protocols on her very first day." Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That kind of report tends to follow people throughout their careers. Elena nodded mutely, but inside her resolve was hardening. She thought about her grandmother, about the countless times she had been dismissed and degraded because people thought she was nobody important. She thought about Amara Washington sitting alone in the back of the cabin, enduring calculated humiliation with impossible dignity. And she made a decision that would haunt Victoria Blackwood for the rest of her life. Victoria Elena said quietly, "I need to ask you something. What did you actually speak with Captain Sullivan about confining Miss Washington to her seat?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I told you crew communications are not your concern. But did you actually speak with him, Elena? You're walking on very thin ice here, because I checked the cockpit communication log. There's no record of any conversation between you and the captain since the initial seating dispute. But you told Ms. Washington that her confinement was captain's orders." Victoria went very still. Elena had just accused her of lying about captain's orders, which was a serious violation of aviation regulations. Falsely claiming captain's authority was grounds for immediate termination and could result in FAA sanctions. "Are you calling me a liar?" Victoria asked, her voice deadly quiet. "I'm asking for clarification, because if you're giving passengers false information about captain's orders, that's something I need to understand. Elena Rodriguez, you have exactly 10 seconds to apologize for that accusation, or I'm writing you up for insubordination." Elena felt her grandmother's spirit beside her, urging her forward. "I also checked the passenger manifests, Victoria. What about them? Amara Washington is listed as board member level VIP, and Marcus Caldwell is confirmed in seat 12B, not 1A, which means we illegally displaced a corporate board member to give her seat to a standby passenger from economy." The color drained from Victoria's face as the magnitude of the situation hit her. She had been conducting a campaign of racial harassment against someone connected to Meridian's corporate leadership at the highest possible level. "That can't be right," Victoria whispered. "I can show you the documentation if you'd like." Victoria grabbed the tablet from Elena's hands, scrolling frantically through the passenger information. With each screen, her confident expression crumbled a little more. The VIP protocols, the seating assignments, Derek's admission. It was all there, documented and undeniable. "This is impossible," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Board members don't fly commercial. They use corporate jets. They certainly don't dress like what?" Victoria couldn't finish the sentence without admitting that her entire campaign of harassment had been based on racist assumptions about how important people were supposed to look. Elena took the tablet back and pulled up one final piece of information that she had discovered Amara Washington's corporate bio from Meridian's investor relations website. The photo showed a professionally dressed woman in an expensive business suit, but it was unmistakably the same person currently sitting in seat 4D. Amara Washington, chairwoman and CEO, Washington Holdings Group. Ms. Washington's investment firm specializes in aviation industry acquisitions and restructuring. She holds advanced degrees in business administration and aerospace engineering from MIT. Victoria read the bio 3 times each reading, making her feel sicker. The woman she had been tormenting for the past 3 hours wasn't just a board member. She was the head of an investment firm that specialized in buying airlines. "Oh, God," Victoria whispered. "Oh, my God." Elena watched as the reality of the situation crashed over her supervisor like a tsunami. Victoria had just spent 3 hours conducting a master class in discriminatory harassment against someone who quite possibly owned significant portions of Meridian Airlines. "Victoria," Elena said softly, "what exactly have we done?" Victoria didn't answer. She was staring at Amara's bio photo, trying to reconcile the powerful executive in the image with the woman she had been treating like garbage for hours. For the first time in her 12-year career, Victoria Blackwood realized she might have made a mistake that couldn't be fixed with charm manipulation or corporate politics. She might have just ended her own career while simultaneously destroying the careers of everyone who had enabled her. and they still had 2 hours left until landing in Seattle. As Flight 847 began its descent toward Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the cabin atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Victoria moved through her duties with mechanical precision, but her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. Elena worked quietly, documenting everything she could while avoiding direct eye contact with her supervisor. Marcus continued to hold court in Seat 1A, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over all of them. The descent announcement crackled over the cabin speakers in Captain Sullivan's authoritative voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into Seattle. Weather conditions are clear, temperature is 62 degrees, and we expect an on-time arrival. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Victoria approached Amara for what she somehow knew would be their final interaction during the flight. The woman in Seat 4D had remained impossibly calm throughout 3 hours of systematic harassment, and that composure now felt ominous rather than satisfying. Ms. Washington Victoria said, her voice lacking its earlier venom. "We'll be landing shortly. I need to ensure your seat is in the upright position and your tray table is secured." Amara looked up from her phone where she had been typing messages with the focused intensity of someone coordinating complex logistics. "Of course. Though I'm curious, will I be permitted to disembark with the other first-class passengers, or do you have special procedures for that as well?" The question was delivered with such mild politeness that it took Victoria a moment to recognize the scalpel hidden within it. Amara was asking whether Victoria planned to subject her to final humiliation during the deplaning process. "Standard deplaning procedures apply to all passengers," Victoria replied carefully. "How reassuring. And I assume Captain Sullivan will be available to discuss the various orders he apparently gave regarding my in-flight restrictions." Victoria's throat went dry. "I'm sure the captain has many responsibilities during landing preparations. I'm sure he does. Fortunately, I have time to wait." Marcus, who had been eavesdropping on the conversation while pretending to read a financial magazine, decided to insert himself into what he perceived as an opportunity to score final points against someone he'd enjoyed seeing degraded. "You know, sweetheart," Marcus called out from one. His voice carrying the lazy confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. "I don't know what kind of complaints you think you're going to file, but you should understand something about how airlines actually work." Amara turned her attention to him with the kind of focused interest usually reserved for particularly interesting insects. "Please enlighten me." Marcus stood up and walked back to Seat 4D, positioning himself in the aisle so he could loom over Amara while ensuring maximum visibility for other passengers. In his mind, this was the moment for a final victory speech that would put the uppity woman in her place once and for all. "Airlines care about their profitable customers," Marcus explained with the condescending tone of someone addressing a particularly slow child. "They care about people who spend real money, who fly regularly, who contribute to their bottom line. They don't care about people who scrape together enough miles for one first-class seat and then think they own the place. Is that what you think happened here? I know what happened here. You somehow got lucky with an upgrade or found a cheap first-class ticket online, and you thought that made you special. But here's the reality check. Princess Airlines know the difference between real customers and temporary tourists. We get treated well because we deserve to be treated well." Victoria listened to Marcus's speech with growing horror. She had inadvertently created a monster encouraging his worst impulses throughout the flight, and now he was delivering a racist manifesto that was almost certainly being recorded by multiple passengers. "And another thing," Marcus continued, warming to his theme, "you can file all the complaints you want. You can write angry letters to customer service posts on social media, even contact local news stations. Nobody cares. You know why, because this is America, sweetheart. Money talks, and people who look like you don't have the kind of money that makes airlines listen." Elena, who was securing the galley for landing, stopped what she was doing and stared in disbelief. Marcus had just delivered an explicitly racist rant that would be impossible to explain away or minimize. If Amara Washington was indeed connected to Meridian's corporate leadership, Marcus had just committed professional suicide in the most public way possible. "Are you finished?" Amara asked calmly. "I'm just getting started. You see, the problem with people like you is that you think equality means you get to act like you're better than your betters. But reality has a way of reminding everyone where they actually stand in the hierarchy." "The hierarchy," Amara repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me more about this hierarchy." Marcus smiled, mistaking her calm inquiry for acknowledgement of defeat. "It's simple. Some people build companies, create jobs, generate wealth, contribute to society. Other people take whatever they can get and complain when it's not enough." "And which category do you think I fall into? I think you're a diversity hire who got lucky with a free ticket and decided to play dress-up in first class. I think you've never earned anything significant in your life. And I think you're about to learn a very important lesson about picking fights with your betters." The cabin had gone completely silent. Every passenger was listening to Marcus's monologue with various degrees of shock, embarrassment, and disgust. The elderly woman in 2F looked like she was about to cry. The businessman in 3A was recording everything on his phone with an expression of profound disbelief. Amara stood up slowly, rising to her full height, which was considerable despite her petite frame. Something in her posture had changed, becoming more formal, more commanding. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been present earlier in the flight. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, "you've spent this entire flight demonstrating exactly the kind of character that led to your current situation. My situation, the bankruptcy proceedings, the federal investigation, the restraining order from your former business partners." Amara's voice remained conversational, but each word landed like a physical blow. "You see, I make it my business to research people who interest me, and you've been very interesting today." Marcus's face went white. "How do you know about the embezzlement charges, the investor lawsuits, the fact that you're flying standby because your credit cards have been frozen?" Amara smiled. "The same way I know that you're not supposed to be in first class at all. The same way I know that you're currently sitting in my seat illegally because Captain Sullivan decided to prioritize the comfort of someone he assumed was important over the rights of someone he assumed wasn't." The color drained completely from Marcus's face. Around the cabin, passengers were leaning forward, hanging on every word of what had become a dramatic revelation. "You want to talk about hierarchies? Mr. Caldwell, let's talk about hierarchies. Let's talk about the hierarchy where airline executives answer to board members, where board members answer to shareholders, and where shareholders answer to the people who actually own the companies they invest in." Victoria, who had been listening to this exchange with growing panic, suddenly understood what was about to happen. She moved quickly toward the cockpit, hoping to warn Captain Sullivan, but Amara's voice stopped her in her tracks. "Ms. Blackwood," Amara said without turning around, "I wouldn't bother the captain just yet. He's going to be very busy in a few minutes." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and Captain Sullivan's voice returned to the speakers. "Welcome to Seattle, where the local time is 4:47 p.m. Please remain seated until we reach the gate and the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." But instead of taxiing toward the terminal, the plane began moving in the opposite direction toward a remote area of the tarmac usually reserved for cargo aircraft and security operations. Marcus looked out the window, his confusion evident. "Why aren't we going to the gate?" Amara pulled out her phone and sent a single text message. "We've landed. Send them in." As the plane rolled to a stop in the middle of the vast concrete expanse, Victoria, Marcus, and Captain Sullivan were about to discover exactly who Amara Washington really was, and exactly how much trouble they were actually in. As the engines wound down to silence, the passengers of Flight 847 found themselves staring out their windows at something none of them had expected to see: a convoy of black SUVs surrounded by airport security vehicles, their lights flashing in the gray Seattle afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Sullivan's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding considerably less confident than during his earlier announcements. We've been directed to a remote parking position for what air traffic control is calling priority passenger protocols. Please remain seated while we clarify the situation. Marcus pressed his face against the window of Seat 1A, watching as official vehicles arranged themselves around the aircraft like pieces on a chessboard. What the hell is going on? This looks like a federal operation. Victoria stood frozen in the center aisle, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The elegant facade she had maintained throughout the flight was cracking, revealing the fear beneath. Elena continued securing the galley, but her movements were quick and nervous, like someone preparing for a hurricane. Amara remained calm in Seat 4D, checking her phone with the casual demeanor of someone reading the weather forecast. She had received confirmations from her assistant, David Kim legal team, positioned board members assembled via secure video link media relations standing by, and most importantly, full documentation ready for immediate review. The forward cabin door opened with its familiar pneumatic hiss, but instead of ground crew, 3 individuals in expensive business suits entered the aircraft. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of people accustomed to handling high-stakes corporate crises. The first was David Kim, Amara's executive assistant and the man who had been coordinating the response from the ground. At 55, David had worked for Amara for 8 years, managing everything from hostile takeover negotiations to congressional testimony. His presence on any aircraft meant that something significant was about to happen. The second was Margaret Chen, chief legal counsel for Washington Holdings Group. At 42, Margaret had built her reputation destroying corporate executives who underestimated her based on her quiet demeanor and slight build. She carried a briefcase that contained enough legal documentation to end several careers before dinner. The third person was someone who made Captain Sullivan's blood run cold. Rebecca Torres, Senior Vice President of Operations for Meridian Airlines. Rebecca reported directly to the CEO and had the authority to terminate any employee from gate agents to senior captains without appeal or review. Mr. Caldwell, David said, addressing Marcus with the polite tone usually reserved for funeral arrangements. Could you please return to your assigned seat? We need to clear the aisle for official business. Marcus, still standing near Seat 4D, looked confused and indignant. My assigned seat is 1A. I don't know who you people think you are, but... Sir Margaret interrupted, opening her briefcase and extracting a tablet. Your assigned seat, according to Meridian's reservation system, is 12B in economy class. You are currently occupying a first-class seat that belongs to another passenger. That's ridiculous. I've been flying first class for years. The captain personally ensured I was upgraded. Rebecca Torres stepped forward, her expression grim. Mr. Caldwell. Captain Sullivan exceeded his authority when he displaced a confirmed first-class passenger to accommodate your standby request. Please return to the economy cabin immediately, or we'll have airport security escort you. While this exchange was happening, Victoria watched in growing horror as she began to understand the magnitude of her mistake. These weren't random corporate executives. They were crisis management specialists, the kind of people who only appeared when companies faced existential threats to their survival. David Kim walked slowly down the aisle until he reached Seat 4D, where Amara was calmly gathering her belongings. The entire cabin watched as he bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that was completely at odds with how she had been treated for the previous 4 hours. Ms. Washington, David said formally on behalf of Washington Holdings Group and our newest subsidiary, I apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received during this flight. The response team is fully prepared to proceed with your instructions. The words hit the cabin like a bomb blast. Several passengers gasped audibly. The elderly woman in 2F grabbed her husband's arm in shock. Even the businessman in 3A, who had been recording everything, lowered his phone in disbelief. But no one reacted more dramatically than Victoria Blackwood. Ms. Washington. Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible. As in, Washington, Holdings Group. Amara stood up, and for the first time during the flight, she commanded the complete attention of everyone in the cabin. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms and congressional hearings. David, thank you for the prompt response. Margaret, I trust you have everything we discussed. She turned to Rebecca Torres. Ms. Torres, I believe we need to have a comprehensive discussion about Meridian's customer service protocols. Rebecca nodded gravely. Ms. Washington, the board has been briefed on the preliminary reports. We are prepared to implement whatever corrective measures you deem appropriate. Marcus, who had been following this conversation with growing confusion and dread, suddenly understood what was happening. Washington Holdings Group, you're the investment firm that bought Meridian Airlines, Amara confirmed. Yesterday, actually. The acquisition was finalized at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, approximately 6 hours before I boarded this aircraft. She looked around the cabin with calm satisfaction. I thought it would be educational to experience our customer service firsthand before implementing any changes. The revelation sent shockwaves through the cabin. Passengers began whispering frantically to each other. Victoria looked like she was about to faint. Even Captain Sullivan, who had emerged from the cockpit to observe the proceedings, stood frozen in disbelief. You own the airline, Marcus said weakly. As of yesterday, yes. Which means I own this aircraft, this route, and technically I employ everyone who has spent the afternoon treating me like garbage. Amara's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the silk. It's been quite an educational flight. Elena, who had been documenting everything from the galley, felt a surge of vindication mixed with terror. She had been right about Amara's status, but she had also been complicit in hours of systematic harassment against the new owner of the company. Ms. Washington, Elena called out, her voice shaking. I tried to help. I documented everything. I have proof of what happened. Amara turned to look at the young flight attendant who had shown moral courage despite the professional risks. Ms. Rodriguez, I noticed your efforts to intervene. We'll definitely be discussing your observations in detail. David Kim consulted his tablet and addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disruption to your travel plans. Due to the serious nature of the incidents that occurred during this flight, we'll need to conduct interviews with all passengers who witnessed discriminatory behavior. Airport services will assist with any missed connections or accommodation needs. Margaret Chen approached Victoria, who was now visibly shaking. Ms. Blackwood, we'll need to speak with you immediately regarding multiple violations of federal anti-discrimination laws, destruction of passenger property, and falsification of captain's orders. I was following standard procedures, Victoria stammered. Ma'am, there are no standard procedures that involve racial harassment, deliberate destruction of electronics, or lying about captain's orders, Margaret replied coldly. Your actions today constitute federal crimes, as well as grounds for immediate termination. Captain Sullivan, realizing that his own career was hanging in the balance, stepped forward with the desperate confidence of someone trying to take control of a situation that had already spiraled beyond recovery. Ms. Washington, he announced loudly, I want you to know that I was not aware of the extent of the service issues in the cabin. Had I known about the inappropriate behavior of my crew members, I would have taken immediate corrective action. Amara studied him with the kind of analytical attention usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. Captain Sullivan, you personally forced me out of my assigned seat to accommodate a standby passenger, despite having access to the reservation system that would have shown my chairman's circle status. You made that decision based solely on your visual assessment of who deserved premium seating. Sullivan's face reddened. That was a judgment call based on passenger comfort and operational efficiency. It was a judgment call based on racial bias, Captain, and it set the tone for everything that followed. Rebecca Torres stepped forward, her expression grim. "Captain Sullivan, you're being relieved of duty immediately. Please surrender your wings and identification before leaving the aircraft." The words hit Sullivan like physical blows. In 30 years of flying, he had never been dressed down by corporate executives in front of passengers and crew. His authority, his reputation, his entire identity as an airline captain was being stripped away in real time. "You can't do this," Sullivan protested. "I have union representation. I have rights." "You have the right to legal counsel," Margaret Chen interjected, "which you're going to need for the federal investigation that's about to begin." As the reality of the situation settled over the cabin, Amara walked slowly toward the front of the aircraft, past the shocked faces of passengers who had watched the entire drama unfold. She stopped at seat 1A, where Marcus was still standing in stunned disbelief. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, "this seat was never yours. It was always mine. But more importantly, the assumptions you made about who deserves respect and dignity were never yours to make either." She turned to address the entire cabin, her voice carrying to every corner of the aircraft. "To those passengers who witnessed what happened here today, I want you to know that your reactions were recorded, your silence was noted, and your choices will be remembered. Some of you showed courage by documenting injustice. Others chose comfort over conscience. The cabin fell completely silent. But change begins now. Starting today, Meridian Airlines will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination training and oversight program in the aviation industry. Not because of lawsuits or bad publicity, but because dignity is not a privilege to be earned. It's a right to be respected." With that Amara Washington owner-executive, and for 4 hours, the target of systematic discrimination walked toward the cabin door and stepped off the aircraft she now owned. Behind her, she left careers in ruins, assumptions shattered, and a cabin full of people who would never forget the day they learned that appearances can be deceiving, but character is always revealed. The executive conference room in Hangar 7 at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was a monument to corporate power and efficiency. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the tarmac where Meridian aircraft moved in carefully choreographed patterns against the backdrop of the Olympic Mountains. The mahogany table could seat 20 people, but today it hosted a much smaller gathering whose consequences would ripple throughout the aviation industry. Amara sat at the head of the table, still wearing her faded denim jacket and scuffed sneakers, but her presence now commanded the room with unmistakable authority. To her right sat David Kim, coordinating responses on multiple devices. To her left, Margaret Chen had arranged stacks of legal documents with the precision of someone preparing for warfare. On the opposite side of the table sat the accused Victoria Blackwood Captain James Sullivan and a nervous-looking Derek Morrison who had been summoned from JFK via video conference. Each of them was accompanied by hastily summoned legal representation, though their lawyers looked increasingly uncomfortable as the scope of the evidence became clear. Rebecca Torres sat at the far end of the table representing Meridian's corporate interests, while Elena Rodriguez occupied a smaller chair near the wall, clutching a folder of documentation that would prove crucial to the proceedings. Large monitors displayed the corporate logos of Washington Holdings Group and Meridian Airlines, but also a third image that made everyone in the room uncomfortable, a timeline showing every incident of discrimination that had occurred during Flight 847, complete with timestamps, witness accounts, and audio recordings. "Let's begin," Amara said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ms. Chen, please present the evidence for the record." Margaret opened the first folder and activated the main display screen. At 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time, Mr. Derek Morrison, Gate Agent Supervisor at JFK Terminal 4, initiated a pattern of discriminatory harassment against Ms. Washington based solely on her appearance. The screen filled with security footage from the airport showing Derek's dismissive gestures and increasingly agitated behavior as he tried to deny Amara's chairman's circle status. "Mr. Morrison, Margaret continued your own statements to other employees, captured on security audio, include the phrase, 'People like her always try this scam.' Care to explain what you meant by 'people like her'?" Derek's lawyer leaned forward. "My client maintains that his comments referred to passengers attempting to use fraudulent upgrades, not to any protected class characteristics." "Interesting interpretation," Margaret replied dryly. She clicked to the next screen, which showed audio waveforms, because when the reservation system confirmed Ms. Washington's legitimate status, Mr. Morrison was recorded saying, "There's no way that's real. Look at her." The audio played clearly through the room's speakers, Derek's voice unmistakable, as he dismissed Amara's legitimacy based on her appearance. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, realizing that his casual racism had been captured with perfect clarity. Furthermore, Margaret continued, "Mr. Morrison coordinated with Captain Sullivan to illegally displace Ms. Washington from her assigned seat, to accommodate Mr. Marcus Caldwell, a standby passenger who had no confirmed first-class reservation." Rebecca Torres leaned forward, her expression grim. "Mr. Morrison, is it true that you overrode the reservation system at Captain Sullivan's request to give Mr. Caldwell seat 1? A Derek's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear before he answered. "I made an operational decision to maximize customer satisfaction for a valued long-term passenger by violating the rights of another passenger whose status level was higher than Mr. Caldwell's. I didn't know about her status level." "You didn't know because you didn't bother to check," Amara interjected quietly. "You made your decision based on appearance and assumptions. Mr. Caldwell looked like he belonged in first class, and I didn't." The room fell silent for a moment before Margaret continued to the next section of evidence. Moving to the in-flight incidents, she said, "We have documented 47 separate acts of discriminatory behavior by Ms. Victoria Blackwood over a 3-hour period." Victoria, who had maintained her composure during the Derek Morrison segment, began to look genuinely frightened as the scope of the evidence became clear. The main screen now displayed a split image on the left, Victoria serving champagne and gourmet meals to Marcus Caldwell. On the right, the same timestamps showing her giving Amara economy class service and refusing basic amenities. Ms. Blackwood. Margaret said you told Ms. Washington that Dom Perignon was reserved for Platinum Elite and above passengers. But Ms. Washington's status was above Platinum Elite, and there were 12 bottles of champagne loaded for this flight. Why did you lie? Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, tried to intervene. My client maintains that she was following standard service protocols based on her understanding of passenger needs. Her understanding, Margaret repeated. Let's explore that understanding. The screen changed to audio waveforms again. Victoria's voice filled the room. Don't ever think you're one of us. Know your place. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Several people winced visibly, and Victoria's lawyer looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Ms. Blackwood. Amara said finally, addressing her tormentor directly. What did you mean by people like us? And what place did you think I should know? Victoria tried to maintain her composure, but her voice shook slightly. I meant people familiar with first-class service protocols. I was trying to maintain cabin standards. By destroying my laptop with cleaning fluid, that was an accident. Margaret clicked to security footage from the cabin, showing Victoria deliberately aiming the spray bottle at Amara's keyboard. This footage shows you observing the laptop for several seconds before spraying cleaning solution directly onto the electronics. Please explain how this was accidental. Victoria's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear. Victoria's face had gone pale, but she maintained her denial. The angle is misleading. I was cleaning the tray table and didn't see the computer. You were looking directly at it, Elena Rodriguez said suddenly from her corner chair. I saw the whole thing. You aimed at her computer on purpose. Victoria spun around to glare at Elena. You're a probationary employee with less than a day in first class. Your observations are hardly credible. Ms. Rodriguez Margaret said, please tell us what you observed during the flight. Elena stood up, still clutching her folder of evidence. Despite her obvious nervousness, her voice was clear and steady. Victoria spent 3 hours systematically harassing Ms. Washington. She denied her appropriate service, destroyed her property, lied about captain's orders, and created a hostile environment based on racial discrimination. She opened her folder and began reading from her notes. At 11:23 a.m. Victoria denied Ms. Washington champagne while serving it to other passengers. At 11:41 a.m., she gave her economy food while others received first-class meals. At 12:15 p.m., she deliberately spilled cleaning fluid on Ms. Washington's laptop. At 12:33 p.m., she lied about captain's orders to confine Ms. Washington to her seat. Elena looked directly at Victoria, and throughout all of this, she encouraged Mr. Caldwell's racist comments and made her own discriminatory statements. I have timestamps for everything. Captain Sullivan, who had been silent during most of the proceedings, finally found his voice. Miss Rodriguez, you're making serious accusations against a senior crew member. Do you have any actual proof, or are these just your interpretations of normal crew procedures? Elena pulled out her tablet and connected it to the main display system. I recorded audio of the captain's orders conversation. Victoria's voice filled the room again. The captain ordered this personally. I don't need to justify crew communications to passengers. Then Elena's voice. When did you speak with the captain about me specifically? And Victoria's response. I don't need to justify crew communications to passengers. Margaret paused the audio. Ms. Blackwood, our review of cockpit communications shows no conversation between you and Captain Sullivan about confining Ms. Washington to her seat. You lied about Captain's orders to intimidate a passenger. Victoria's lawyer was frantically taking notes, clearly realizing that her client's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Captain Sullivan, Rebecca Torres, said, let's discuss your role in these events. Sullivan straightened in his chair, trying to project authority despite his deteriorating position. I made command decisions based on crew recommendations and passenger safety concerns. You forced a chairman's circle passenger out of her assigned seat to accommodate a standby passenger from economy, without checking reservation details, without considering the passenger's status, based solely on your visual assessment of who belonged in first class. I relied on crew input and my experience with passenger management. Your experience, Amara repeated. Captain Sullivan, in your 30 years of flying, how many Chairman's Circle passengers have you personally removed from their assigned seats? Sullivan hesitated. Chairman's Circle it's not a common status level. It's not a common status level because it's reserved for corporate executives, board members, and major shareholders, people whose treatment by your airline directly impacts company operations and reputation. Amara's voice remained calm, but her words carried the weight of absolute authority. I'm curious about your decision-making process when you saw a young black woman in casual clothes claiming to belong in first class. It wasn't about race, Sullivan protested. Then, what was it about experience, operational knowledge, understanding of premium service expectations? So you determined that I lacked experience and understanding based on what exactly Sullivan realized he was trapped. Any honest answer would reveal the racial bias that had driven his decision, but continuing to deny it made him look dishonest and foolish. I made a judgment call, he said, finally. Based on prejudice, Amara replied. And that judgment call enabled everything that followed. Margaret Chen stood up, signaling the transition to consequences. Mrs. Washington, We've presented comprehensive evidence of systematic discrimination, destruction of property, falsification of authority, and creation of a hostile environment. How would you like to proceed? Amara stood as well, walking to the windows that overlooked the tarmac. Below, ground crews were servicing aircraft with efficient precision, unaware of the corporate revolution taking place above their heads. Derek Morrison, she said without turning around. Your employment with Meridian Airlines is terminated effective immediately. You'll be escorted from JFK by security, and your actions today will be reported to federal aviation authorities for investigation. Derek started to protest, but his lawyer silenced him with a sharp gesture. Captain Sullivan, you're being removed from active duty pending a federal investigation into discriminatory practices and falsification of operational records. Your pilot's license will be reviewed by the FAA for potential sanctions. Sullivan's face went white. A license review could end his flying career permanently. Ms. Blackwood Amara continued, still facing the window. Your behavior today violated federal anti-discrimination laws, involved destruction of passenger property, and included falsification of crew authority. You're terminated for cause with notation in your employment record that will prevent you from working for any airline in the United States. Victoria finally broke tears streaming down her face. Please, Ms. Washington, I have a mortgage, car payments, credit cards. I can't afford to lose this job. Amara turned around, her expression not unkind, but absolutely resolute. Ms. Blackwood, you should have considered those financial obligations before spending 3 hours teaching me that people who look like me don't deserve basic human dignity. The room fell silent except for Victoria's quiet sobbing. However, Amara continued, Ms. Rodriguez will be receiving a promotion to senior flight attendant and a commendation for moral courage under pressure. She'll also be heading our new passenger advocacy program. Elena looked shocked. Ms. Washington, thank you. You earned it. You saw injustice and chose to document it despite personal risk. That's exactly the kind of employee this airline needs. Amara returned to her seat at the head of the table. This concludes the disciplinary proceedings, but the transformation of this company is just beginning. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. Starting today, Meridian Airlines will implement the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in commercial aviation. Not because we have to, but because every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what assumptions people make about their worth. And to those of you leaving today, she added, I hope you'll remember that character isn't revealed by how you treat people who can help you. It's revealed by how you treat people when you think it doesn't matter. The meeting was over. Careers had ended. But for Meridian Airlines, a new era was about to begin. As the formal proceedings concluded and legal representatives began gathering their documents, Amara remained seated at the head of the conference table. The weight of the day's events, not just the discrimination she had endured, but the broader implications for an industry she was now positioned to change, settled over the room like evening shadows across the tarmac. Victoria Blackwood sat motionless, her elegant composure finally shattered completely. The tears had stopped leaving behind the hollow stare of someone whose entire world had collapsed in the span of an afternoon. Her lawyer was already discussing unemployment benefits and the challenges of finding work in an industry where her name would be permanently associated with federal discrimination violations. Captain Sullivan gathered his personal items with the mechanical movements of someone in shock. 30 years of authority, respect, and professional identity had been stripped away, leaving behind an aging man who would have to explain to his family why he was no longer allowed to fly commercial aircraft. Derek Morrison's video connection had been terminated after his dismissal, but his absence felt ominous. By now, airport security would have escorted him from JFK, and his career in aviation was over before the sun set on the East Coast. But it was Elena Rodriguez who drew Amara's attention as the room slowly emptied. The young flight attendant sat quietly in her corner chair, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. In the space of one afternoon, she had witnessed systematic discrimination, found the courage to document it despite personal risk, and been promoted to a position that could define her entire career. "Ms. Rodriguez," Amara said gently, "could you stay for a moment?" Elena approached the conference table with obvious nervousness, still carrying the folder of evidence that had helped expose the truth about Flight 847. "You took a considerable risk today," Amara continued. "You could have stayed silent, protected your new position, avoided confrontation with your supervisor. Instead, you chose to document injustice." Why, Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer. "My grandmother raised me, Ms. Washington. She cleaned offices for 40 years, and she faced treatment like what I saw you endure. She always told me that when you see someone being hurt because of how they look, you have two choices: look away and become part of the problem, or speak up and become part of the solution." Wise woman, your grandmother. She would have been proud today. Not because I got promoted, but because I didn't look away. Amara stood and walked to the windows again, watching ground crews prepare aircraft for departure. "Ms. Rodriguez, your new position will involve more than just customer service. You'll be helping to design training programs that address unconscious bias, implementing real-time feedback systems for passenger complaints, and creating accountability measures that prevent what happened today from ever happening again." It sounds overwhelming. Change always is. But you've already proven you have the moral courage this job requires. Amara turned back to Elena. "The question is, are you ready to help transform an entire industry?" Elena straightened in her chair, her nervousness replaced by determination. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." Rebecca Torres, who had been quietly observing this exchange, approached with a tablet displaying preliminary reports from other Meridian flights. "Ms. Washington, the initial response has been remarkable. Word about today's events has spread through social media, and passengers are already submitting discrimination reports through our customer service channels. We're receiving calls from civil rights organizations, aviation industry groups, and congressional offices." "Good," Amara replied. "Transparency accelerates change." Margaret Chen joined the conversation, carrying a thick folder of legal documents. "The federal investigation will begin Monday morning. FAA officials want to interview everyone involved, and the Department of Transportation is launching a broader review of discrimination practices across all major airlines. They'll have our complete cooperation," Amara assured her. "But Margaret, I want you to go beyond compliance. I want Meridian to become the gold standard for equality in aviation. Voluntary measures that exceed federal requirements." David Kim looked up from his devices where he had been coordinating media responses and stakeholder communications. "Ms. Washington, CNN wants an exclusive interview. The Washington Post is requesting a statement. And the NAACP is asking about partnering on industry-wide reform initiatives." Amara considered this carefully. She had never sought publicity for its own sake, preferring to let her actions speak louder than press releases. But today's events had created an opportunity to address discrimination beyond just one airline. Schedule the interviews, she decided, but frame them around systemic change, not personal grievances. This isn't about revenge, it's about progress. As the meeting wound down and participants began to leave, Victoria Blackwood approached the table one final time. Her earlier arrogance had been completely replaced by something that looked like genuine remorse. "Ms. Washington," Victoria said quietly, "I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I need to say something." Amara turned to face her former tormentor, her expression neutral but not unkind. "I was wrong." Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. not just about airline policies or service procedures. I was wrong about everything. About who deserves respect, about what gives people value, about how I should treat other human beings. She paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily. I thought I was protecting standards, but I was just protecting prejudice, Ms. Blackwood. Amara replied, recognition is the first step toward change. I hope you'll use this experience to examine not just your professional choices, but your personal ones as well. Victoria nodded, tears threatening again. I will. And Ms. Washington, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. For all of it. With that, Victoria Blackwood walked out of the conference room and out of the aviation industry forever. But her apology hung in the air like a promise that the lessons of Flight 847 would extend far beyond the people directly involved. As the last participants departed, Amara found herself alone with David Kim and Margaret Chen, the core team that had supported her through years of building Washington Holdings Group into a force for corporate transformation. David, she said, tomorrow morning, I want you to convene an emergency board meeting for all Washington Holdings subsidiaries. Every company we own needs to review their discrimination prevention protocols within 90 days. Understood. Anything else? Yes. I want us to establish a whistleblower fund similar to what we discussed for banking clients. Employees who report discrimination should be rewarded, not retaliated against. Margaret Chen smiled, the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her all day. Ms. Washington, what you've accomplished today extends far beyond one airline. The precedent you're setting will influence corporate behavior across multiple industries. Amara walked to the conference room door, pausing before she left. Margaret, precedents only matter if they lead to lasting change. The real test isn't what happened today. It's whether passengers 5 years from now can fly with dignity regardless of how they look or what assumptions people make about their bank accounts. As she stepped into the hallway, Amara reflected on the strange journey of the past 18 hours. She had boarded Flight 847 as a successful executive conducting routine due diligence on a new acquisition. She was leaving as the catalyst for what might become the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in aviation history. The elevator descended toward the ground floor, carrying her past the corporate offices where policies would be rewritten, training programs redesigned, and accountability measures implemented. But the real change she knew wouldn't happen in conference rooms or legal documents. It would happen one interaction at a time, one passenger at a time, one moment of basic human decency at a time. Amara Washington had owned Meridian Airlines for less than 24 hours, but she had already begun transforming it into something unprecedented, a company where dignity wasn't a privilege to be earned based on appearance or assumptions. It was simply the right every passenger deserved, and that transformation was just beginning. Meridian Airlines' customer satisfaction scores had reached industry-leading levels, with discrimination complaints dropping to virtually zero. The Dignity in Flight program had become a model copied by airlines worldwide. Victoria Blackwood was working at a highway rest stop cafe outside Phoenix. Her airline career permanently ended. Captain Sullivan faced ongoing FAA investigations and had been forced into early retirement. Derek Morrison was employed by a small regional carrier as a baggage handler after his gate agent credentials were permanently revoked. Elena Rodriguez had emerged as a national advocate for workplace equality, speaking at industry conferences and helping design training programs used across the aviation sector. Her grandmother had lived to see her featured on the cover of Aviation Week magazine as Employee of the Year. Marcus Caldwell's business empire had collapsed under federal investigation, with his attitude on Flight 847 becoming a case study in business schools about the consequences of entitlement and prejudice. The aviation industry reported a 30% reduction in discrimination complaints industry-wide within 6 months of the Flight 847 incident. Meridian's approach proved that dignity and profitability were not mutually exclusive. treating all passengers with respect had actually increased customer loyalty and reduced legal exposure across the board. The Washington Protocol, named after Amara's intervention, became standard practice for airlines worldwide, real-time discrimination reporting, immediate investigation procedures, and zero-tolerance policies, backed by meaningful consequences. Employee training programs shifted from compliance-based approaches to empathy-focused education that addressed unconscious bias before it could manifest as discriminatory behavior. More importantly, the story of Flight 847 resonated beyond aviation. Hospitality chains, retail corporations, and service industries adopted similar oversight measures. The principle that had guided Amara's response, that dignity is a right, not a privilege, became embedded in corporate cultures across multiple sectors. Studies showed that companies implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination measures experienced higher employee satisfaction, increased customer retention, and improved financial performance. The business case for equality had been proven not through statistics or research, but through the lived experience of one woman who refused to accept that her appearance determined her worth. This story hits me personally because it shows how quickly we judge others based on appearance rather than character. Amara Washington didn't need to prove her worth to anyone; she already owned the airline. But Victoria Marcus and Derek revealed their true nature by assuming that expensive clothes and entitled attitudes meant more than basic human decency. The real lesson isn't about hidden CEOs or dramatic reversals. It's about treating every person with respect, because that's what decent human beings do. When we see someone being discriminated against, we have a choice: look away and enable the behavior, or speak up and become part of the solution. Elena Rodriguez showed us what courage looks like. She risked her career to document injustice, and that choice transformed not just her life, but an entire industry. Sometimes the smallest act of moral courage creates the biggest waves of change. Remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence costs everything.